Okay, so thanks for joining today. For me, it's evening, maybe morning, depending on where you are. We're going to run through Primavera P6. And primarily, I'm going to show you Primavera P6, the client tool. I'll show you very briefly the web tool, but I think I'll do some follow-up sessions in the new year on the web tool if people are interested. Okay, so at the end of the webinar, when you log out, if you are interested, just throw it in the comments and that'll help us know if people want to see more about the web. And we'll do it that way. So I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm joining you from Calgary. I am the founder and CEO of Emerald Associates. And as I mentioned, we're going to run through P6. So let's talk about P6. It's been a product itself since 1999. And so it's had a long history. And of course, before that, Primavera had P3 and SureTrack. So all of that knowledge from many, many years is inside of this tool. Now, P6 and P3, I would say, I think they get a bad rap. They get a rap of being way too difficult to use, too hard to learn. And I think that's really unfair. Now, partly, of course, I've been using these tools since I graduated from engineering school, which is a long time ago. But I think mostly because they have such strong flexibility, people have this thought that it's too hard to learn. So I'm going to show you just an overview of the tools and touch on how you can use the tools to collaborate across many locations, how you can do true cost, resource, and schedule analysis. I'll touch on how you can use issues and risks, but I won't do that much in today's session. And really the thing is to have proper real-time access to where you are on the project. That's really the key. Now, all of these sort of software tools, these CPM software tools, are put together to help you manage timing, of course, so schedule, resourcing, so your effort, who needs to do what, and of course the costs. So it does, P6 lets you do all of those aspects. Now, the other key thing with P6, it's multi-user. So more than one person can log into one project at a given time, and you can open more than one project at a time. So multi-user, multi-project. And that is really the huge advantage that P6 has over all other competitors. So before we go much further, let me ask a quick question. What scheduling tools are you currently using? Okay, so that's just some interesting feedback, and we do share all these feedbacks on our website. So you can go poke around our website to see the answers that people give during these different webinars. Now we amalgamate them after many webinars and put them up. So always interesting to see what is going on out in the marketplace. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and vote, go ahead, and I'll show the results of those who chose to vote. So it's an interesting mix. Some P6 users, some Microsoft Project, some Excel. Of course, you may be using other tools, or you may not have had a chance to really embark on a proper tool. But at minimum, people usually use Word or Excel at minimum. So what I'm going to try and show you is how using something like P6 can really just broaden what you can do with not only the way you build out your schedule, but also how you share that data. Okay, really it changes the dynamic of what you can do with it. And ultimately, we've got to remember, we're trying to communicate. That's the whole point of using P6. We're trying to communicate when people need to be where and what the work is that they need to be doing this week, next week, and so on. That's the whole objective that we're trying to achieve. And we're trying to stay ahead of problems, right? Because a plan changes. All plans change, personal as well as project plans. over time, and you need to be able to see the changes and react to them. So those are some of the key benefits that we're going to touch on in using P6. I'm going to ask another quick question. Now, this question says, what parts of P6 do you use? But regardless of whether you're using P6 or not, I'm kind of curious. Do you use currently just scheduling? Do you actually do resource planning as well? Do you also try and do resources, costs, as well as schedule? So that's what I'm kind of curious, because I'm going to touch on all three today. I'm going to show you how you can use P6 to do scheduling, resource management, as well as cost management. Okay, so that's what I'm going to show you today. So an interesting mix. So I know a few years ago, I think it was Oracle, and I think it could be 5 to 7 years ago. So things may have changed, but they did do a survey of some of their clients, and they wanted to know how people were using P6. So that exact same question. And the results were pretty much 100% used it for schedule. 70, I think it was in the range of 70% used it for schedule as well as resource. And in the range of 40% used it for schedule, resource, and cost. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of a flavor for what it was a few years ago. And it may have changed, but I would imagine not drastically. Okay. Now, some of the reasons we've heard people don't use resources and costs are sometimes the volume of data to manage. So we'll touch on that towards the end, just to give you a feeling for some of the things that Airmold can help you with, because we have a huge toolkit. We're very strong on integrations because we have had programmers on our team for 27 years. So we've been in business for 27 or 28 years, and we've had programmers on the team since then. So we've got a lot of strength on customizing P6. We've got a huge toolkit, so we've got add-ons. And of course, we've done a lot of work on integration. So we'll touch on a bit of that. And if you have questions along those lines, go ahead and ask. It's fine. So let me just give you a bit of an overview of P6, how it works, and then I'll start jumping into the software and show you some ideas live in the tool. So P6 is really integrated portfolio management. It lets you, as I mentioned, do multiple users, multiple projects. It can become your single data source, a repository, but it gives you centralized project management capability. Okay, so we're not working on projects standalone and checking them in and checking them out, none of that sort of thing. It's the projects are inside P6, and through security, we give you certain access points. Okay, so most of our clients run it centralized. Now, this could be in your own environment. So if you have servers and IT folks, you can have it in your own environment. If you prefer not to have it in your own environment, you can have it in a cloud. The cloud can be the Oracle cloud, or it could be a third-party cloud, like we host a lot of clients in P6 in our cloud. Okay, so you can deploy it many different ways. So the tool is highly flexible from that perspective. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take a look at how you build out schedules. Okay, so this is just a Gantt chart, and you can have it with multiple projects. We're going to want to see how we can look at resources and see whether we've got some overloads, and I'm going to show you that live. And we're going to take a look at costs as well. So how do we look at costs? How could we do that kind of work in P6? And as I mentioned, probably today, I don't think I'll show you, whoops, sorry, I clicked too far. I don't think I'll show you the web tool in much detail, but we'll leave that for next year, and we'll do some sessions on the web tool specifically. Okay, so I'm going to jump in, and we're going to take a look at how you can use P6. And as I mentioned, I'm going to show primarily the client, so what's called the P6 client. Okay, now if you buy P6 You get access to both the client and the web if you buy what we would call P6 ePPM. And the way that it's sold, it's a named user license. Okay, so for each scheduling person you want to give access to, they need a license. So that's how that works. Okay, so let me explain what you are looking at. So currently, you can see I have a few different tabs open here. So we can look at the list of projects. That's what I'm looking at right now. And I can open one project, or I don't know if you can see this, but I have these 4 projects open, okay? So there's a little folder and it looks like it's open. And so I have multiple projects open. And you can see that up here at the top too. I can work in one or many, and it's all depending on security. Now, depending on where you work, okay, so let's say you're a contractor, you may have a node, an EPS node, as I'm showing here, for each one of your clients, or perhaps each one of your departments, or perhaps each one of, if you're maybe an oil and gas company or electrical utility, you may have a node for each one of your plants. Okay, so you can organize the data very, very many different ways in P6. And to me, that is one of the huge strengths of P6. And I'll touch on the coding structure that you have inside of the system, how you can expand the data that you want to put inside the system. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to look at scheduling, we're going to look at resourcing, we're going to look at costs. We're going to touch on all those 3. So let's start with scheduling. So of course, scheduling is about dates. So we can see here a very high level summary Gantt chart of the project. Now, I have activities inside of there. So tasks or activities would be common terminology. We've got different number of activities, and I can see here some statistics. Okay, so P6 is very strong on data. There's lots of fields, which is why it gets a bit of a bad rap that it's hard to learn because there's so many fields, but it's not that hard to wrap your head around what they are. Okay, so it doesn't take that much effort to get sort of the lay of the land and figure out what all these fields are for. Okay, and there's lots of help inside the software to help you, and you can certainly take training. That's another way to get you pointed in the right direction. So we can see here we've got activities and we've got some statistics on the activities that are completed, in progress, not started. So those are really the 3 statuses. We want to know where we're at compared to our baseline. Okay, so a baseline is usually what you're tracking against. So it could be the document that you signed with the owner, let's say if you're a contractor, for your deliverables. Okay, and then we're tracking against the baseline. So here we can see very quickly that, oops, we started a lot later than we should have. Okay, and we need to know why that would be. And as you would expect in that case, we're finishing a lot later. So that's not the best start, but it can happen. Okay. So we can see that sort of data here at the top level. So it's sort of the high level view, a summary level view of what's inside the project. So if we want to deep dive into the project, we open it up and we go into the activities. So this is probably the most common place that people work. If you're building your schedule, this is probably the window you're going to work in 90% of the time. Okay. So let's kind of talk about what we're seeing here. So I'm looking at a list of 4 projects in my example, and I've got all those open. I can collapse to see each of the projects. So I can see there, that's like another little summary that I'm looking at. And I can see a few different colored lines here. So generally, we like to show a baseline. Okay, so what we're comparing against to our current schedule. So where we plan to be right now versus where we want it to be. Okay, either at a contract signing or whatever the case may be. If you baseline your project, you might have more than one baseline. So P6 lets you compare your dates against multiple baselines. So in my example, I've got two baselines. So you have some yellow milestones and I have some orange. Okay, so I can do that in P6. I can compare to more than one baseline at a given time. So you can see here I've organized my project by milestones. So here are some of the key deliverables. And in my case, I did them more or less by phase. So engineering, construction, commissioning, startup. Okay. And then I've got some, what we would call, these are called level of effort activities. So these are buckets for tracking things like project scheduling, project management, cost control. Okay, so those are pretty common ones, and those are called level of efforts. So they span pretty much the length of the project or component of the project. Okay, now you would use that kind of thing for resource management. Okay, I still have costs related to scheduling. I still have costs and resources related to project controls, project management. So those can be very valuable for that. If you have timesheets that marry up to that, that's where you would have those folks charge their time to. Okay, so that's where that can be very important. And then I have work scopes, so work packages, deliverables that we're starting to track. Okay, so again, I'll just pop some of those open. So these are simple ones, right? This is just for demoing it. And I've got a work package for a civil turbine. Civil in the turbine area. So civil works, earthworks, etc. And your schedule would likely have more activities than mine. Okay, this is just, again, a simple example for demoing. And you would generally organize your work by a phase. So I've just done a simple example with engineering, any fabrication or procurement, the construction that I'm planning to do, and then commissioning and startup. Okay? Very simple example here, just to give you the feel of how you would use P6. So each activity has a duration, a length of time. Now, I'm showing that in days. If you do maintenance planning, if you do turnaround planning, you can certainly put those in hours. If you're doing really long range planning, you might want to do quarterly, monthly. Okay, so you can control that. Okay, most common is daily, and that's what I'm showing you right now. So you can see that some of these activities were supposed to be short. Some are starting to look like they're going to go longer. And that is how we would manage against the original plan. Okay, and we can see that, and we can have variances that P6 tells us, so we can see where things have changed from the original plan. Now, of course, we've got durations, but we also want to put a sequence on here. So you can see that we've got these black lines. These lines are what we call relationships or logic or precedence diagram, okay, where you're putting together the order that work is going to take place in, okay. So for example, you need to do the fabrication generally before you receive the equipment in any given area. Or I might have logic that go between different WBS elements. Okay, so for example, my civil work in the turbine area might have to come before I do any civil work in the reactor area. Okay, so I might want to actually put logic between the different work packages. So We can build logic in many different ways in P6. There's always more than one way to do things. And in this example, I'm going to say I've got to do this work package before this one. Okay. So I can highlight these two activities and I can put logic and it will draw a new logic tie, which it did. And in this case, it's set to auto schedule. So it automatically changed the dates. Okay. Unfortunately, not for the better. It pushed things out. Okay. So that's a very simple way to build some logic. Now, I might have logic sequencing or ordering between more than one project. So this is where P6 shines above the competition. It lets me open more than one project at any given time, so I can do logic between projects. So it's inter-project logic ties is what that's called. So I might have piping that depends on the civil works, right? So the design of the civil comes before the piping design. So I can certainly put logic between those. Or construction, okay? So maybe the construction, obviously, I need to do the civil works first, and then I want to do the piping that goes on top of it. So again, I can work with more than one project open inside of P6. So let's say here the civil works need to be done in the civil, let's make sure I do the right thing, reactor area. So let me get the right area here. So this is the reactor area, the civil works. And I'll just say the civil works have to be done before I can do the piping construction. So same thing, I'm gonna just grab those two activities, highlight one, highlight the other, and do a logic tie, and it's going to build the logic. Okay. And it'll reschedule if because I've told it to, or I can schedule it explicitly and have it run the schedule. And it may move things, it may not, because there could already be logic that is already controlling it. Okay, so the key thing there is, of course, if something happens to this activity, if it starts and it's taking longer to go through, then you're going to see the impact automatically on the next activity. Now, these may be in the same project or they may be in two different projects. Okay, so it really depends on how you lay out the different schedules that you're managing. You may have a completely different contractor doing your civil work, and thus having its own project makes sense. And then you might have a completely different contractor doing your piping and your electrical work, for example. So that's why it could make good sense to split them up, okay? Because they're providing different schedules, but you don't want to lose the inter-project relationship requirement. Okay, now, in terms of P6, in terms of other fantastic features, in terms of modeling, we have a lot of different types of activities that we can model, meaning what is going to control when you start updating. So we have the ability to model activities that are fixed budgets. So I have only so many man hours that I can use, or a fixed duration, meaning I have to get it done in 20 days because that's my commitment. And if I need to hire more folks and have more folks work on it, then I'm going to need to do that. So we can model the types of work that you're dealing with in your projects. So there's lots of functionality there. So that's really, really a great part of how P6 works. Okay, so that's a very, very quick overview on Gantt charts. Now, let me touch on another hugely important piece of P6. So I'll show you, you can look at this all this information in a logic diagram. Now, you can't see it right now, what all that means, but this is very important when you are trying to understand whether or not you've built sequencing out correctly. So this gives you a very high level view, and then you can zoom in and you can see how the activities are linked to one another. Okay. Now this is important because, as we talked about at the beginning, we're trying to make sure we get the right people to the right place at the right time. If you have a crew show up too early and the work's not ready for them, that could be very expensive. It could even result in a claim or a dispute. So that's where you want to make sure you're building out the sequencing very well inside of P6, okay, with enough detail to make sure you've got responsibilities assigned to each work scope. Okay, each activity should have an independent, responsible person. Now, once you build all that, so you put your list of tasks in, your activities in, you develop your durations, you develop your logic, you should start to formulate these red lines, what you would call the critical path. Okay, now that's an important piece because that is showing you the work that is controlling how long the project is going to take. Now, a minute ago, of course, we were seeing that our activities are quite a bit later than our baseline. So it also will highlight if you're late, okay, with what is called negative float. Now, if you're late, you're going to have to fix that. You have to address how you're going to get the project back on track. Okay, so you're going to have different options. You could rearrange the order of work. So, for example, instead of having this whole piping mobilization take place before the earthworks, could I start somewhere before, right? So instead of waiting it to finish, could I start it partway through the mobilization? Okay, and maybe I can get started 5 days after I start mobilizing. Okay, so those are the types of things you're going to have to address if you're seeing a critical path and you're seeing that certain activities are behind. Now, when you're looking at critical path, something that's very important to look at is who's responsible for each of those activities. So we have a tremendous part of P6, which is the ability to code the work. Okay, so let me show you some coding capabilities. So we have the ability to add fields to P6, lots of fields, and they're very organized. It's a very organized approach. So we have two types of fields that we can put into the system so we can introduce our specific requirements for organizing data. So we have pick lists, like I have here. So this is what is called a code. So that's a dictionary. We build a list, and then we can use that list and assign it. Okay, so for example, vendors. Vendors is a way that you can tag who is in charge of delivering that particular scope of work. So in this case, I'm on Retube Construction. So who is doing that? That is who you would tag it with right there. So who's the vendor? So in this case, it's probably an engineering EPCM company. And not only do I have the vendor, but I also could put the crew that's going to do the work. Okay, so this really helps in terms of being able to organize my data. So the ability to do coding inside of P6, and we can do it everywhere. So I could have coded the project. I can code the activities. And the benefit is I'll show it to you in a second. I can do filters. So I just, instead of having 20, 30 pages of a Gantt chart, I can pare that down to 2 pages just for engineering X's work. I could filter on, I can group on it, I can filter on it, as I mentioned, so I can really use that to make sure I target my data that I give out to the team. Okay. I don't know if you've ever been on a job where you receive a Gantt chart printout and it's 10, 20, 30 pages. Well, I've been in a meeting where that was given to people, and when they left the room, some people threw them in the garbage. Okay. Because they're not going to spend the time looking through pages and pages and pages of Gantt chart. Okay. So filtering is key. And coding is what lets us do all that. Now, coding is what I love about P6. Okay, so what I would call, I've written blogs about it, tagging and bagging. You want to be able to answer any question that your manager or your client could possibly ask you. Okay, and the questions are always related to who, to what, to when, to where, how, and why. Those are the questions. So as long as you code all that information with who, what, when, where, how, why, you're going to be able to answer any question that they can come up with. Okay. So let me give you a few examples of the codes. So let me go here. This will make more sense. So phase. A phase code is really a fantastic one. Okay, so I've made a very simple phase code. So I've got engineering, fabrication, construction, commissioning, startup, and you can have closeout, of course. So that's a huge one because I'm going to show you how easy it's going to be for me to switch the way we're looking at this data. Work package, another really big one. You want work packaging reference numbers so you can have consistent approach on discussions from engineering through to startup. Okay, so very simple. This is the deliverable, the civil for turbine area, civil for reactor area, etc. Very big, important thing that you should do on your projects is have some sort of work packaging deliverable. And then the who that I mentioned a minute ago. So this is the same code I showed you a second ago, just in a different layout. Now, another thing I've added to P6, you can see we have the ability to add fields that are not a pick list. This field is what is called a user-defined field, and we can have different kinds. So we've got flags, as you can see here, and we've got the ability to add dates, to add costs, to add calculatable fields, so numerics, text fields, so you can put different notes. Very, very flexible on how you can enhance P6 to make it work better for your team. Okay. This is just an example that I threw in here. And this particular field is from one of Emerald's add-on tools called P6QA. And this is highlighting that some of these activities are missing logic. So this activity might have been added to the system and we forgot to build the logic. Okay, so I can see here I've got the review of the engineering work coming before the engineering is finished. So that's probably wrong. So I should build logic between those two. Okay, and then that's going to reschedule it. Okay, so that's a tool that we sell that's on top of P6. And some of those add-ons can save you a lot of time. So those could be of interest. Okay, so it's rescheduling, and as you saw, it rearranged the order of the work. Now, let me show you how valuable this coding is, and then I'm going to jump over to resources. So with all that coding in place, I could rearrange the way that I'm looking at the list of work. So I'd like to actually organize it by phase and then work package. Oops, sorry, grab the wrong thing. So I actually want to reorder this by phase. So give me all the engineering work, regardless of which project it's in. So I've got 4 projects with engineering work, and then group it by engineering, and then by work package, and then fabrication and work package, and then construction and work package. Okay. So with these codes, there we go, perfect. I can rearrange very easily how I'm looking at the data. So this is what is done through filtering, grouping, sorting, and layouts. So layouts are the bread and butter of P6, and you can see how I'm switching between these different layouts to look at this data very, very quickly. Okay, so I'm using, this is a huge part of P6. It's always been there since P3, and it's core functionality on that makes P6 so wonderful to work with, because I can use the same data, but just look at it in so many different ways so quickly. And then I can throw in a filter real quick here. And I think I've got one for engineering X. Yeah, so I can just filter on only the work that engineering X company is going to do. Okay, so very, very quickly, because I planned out all my who, what, when, where, how, why coding structures, I can very, very efficiently get a targeted report to engineering X, and they can see where they need to be working and when. Okay, so this is really the thing that makes P6 so fantastic and head and shoulders over the competition. Okay, so I've touched a lot on kind of Gantt charts and activities. I want it to look a little bit at resources. So when you're figuring out an activity and how long it's going to be, you might be saying, well, it depends. It depends if I put 1 person on it, or if I put 2 people on it, or if I put 10 people on it. Okay. So the resourcing is another big piece in P6. Now, let me first show you how you look at resourcing, or how you put resourcing into the system. And then we can go ahead and look at the graphs that I was just showing you there. Okay, let's look at an activity called earthworks, so civil earthworks. And we could also look at some engineering. So I switched my layout. My layout is including slightly different fields. So in this example, I've got some fields about resources. So we have kind of 2 layers in P6. We have roles and resources. And a role can be, as you can see here, sort of a grouping, and a resource could be more specific. So it's sort of the layering that we have. And then in terms of resources, we have different kinds of resources we can set up in P6. So hopefully you can see those little icons. So we've got labor, we've got equipment, and we have materials. So we can actually put inside of the system a tremendous amount of detail that can model what you're going to be doing on the job site. So in this case, we've got a backhoe and a dozer that is going to do the earthworks and going to help with some piling. Okay, and we've got some laborer who are going to perform the work. Now, this particular activity is 45 days long, and we've got the amount of units, our budgeted units, so the total amount. And again, it's labor, it's equipment, and it could be materials. Okay, and we've got the unit price that we've got inside of here. Now that's coming from a dictionary that we built. And the dictionary can be very, very flexible. You can have different unit prices for day shift versus night shift. You can have different unit prices that change at different periods of time, different years perhaps. And we've also built add-ons with our P6 calculator to have different unit rates for every project if you want to. Okay, so you can get quite flexible within the tool, and if you need to enhance it, we've done it for many clients, construction companies and manufacturing companies primarily. Now this data is what's feeding that graph that I was in a minute ago. So we'll go back to the graph. And what the graph is trying to show me, now this particular one I'm looking at is the engineering, so that's more up here. And it's trying to let me know that I've got a bit of a problem here, because this little green section is how many engineers I have, lead engineers in this case. But look at this red. This red is how much work they have to do. So this is showing me my overloads. I have some very big problems here. Because of course, this is what, 10 times, maybe 20 times the amount of work to the team members that I have. There's no way I can get that done, even if I tried to clone them, even if I tried to get my team to work overtime. I'm never going to be able to get all that work done. So I've got some real problems here, which means I'm going to have to rearrange some of the work, okay? Now this is highlighting that I've got an overload right here. Now that's for the engineering lead. I've got overloads for my drafting team too, okay? Not quite as bad, but it's still pretty bad. And I might have overloads for every single one of these. Yeah, I've got overloads in commissioning, skilled labor. I've got too many people and not enough work. So P6 is highlighting where I've got these problems. And then there's strategies that you can use to fix those problems, okay? There's a tool inside there called leveling, which will help try and rearrange the work for you. But you need to know if you've got too much work for the team that you've got, because you're going to have to deal with that, right? You might need to hire some outside resources. You might, for engineering, I might need to go get an engineering company to help me. Or I might need to ask for an extension of time, or I might need to go get one of my other locations within my organization to assist. So this is how you're going to know, and P6 highlights it for you, which is fantastic, and it can also help you deal with them, okay? So that's a bit more of an advanced topic, but it does have some capabilities in there for you to put priorities and for it to try and help you rearrange the work, okay? Now, rearranging the work would be hopefully not bumping it into critical path, into those red bars that we showed you earlier, right? Because that is going to be pushing your timeline out, okay? But first and foremost, you put what is the effort that you need to expend, and then you're going to take a look at whether you've got any busts. So we can see some busts here. Now I can look at my resources in many different ways. So I showed you overloads. I might want to look at my resources as a total, so more of a overall. So what's it looking like in terms of the whole project? So in this case, I'm showing you the original budget. I'm showing you what we've used up. So it looks like in some cases we've used less than we had expected, which might be good. It might also mean we're not getting the work done. So you can't completely tell what that means at this point. And then it's letting you know how much work is still left to be done. Okay, so this is an important one, and it's more of an overview. So you can move from the detail to more of an overview. And then we could also look at these histograms as a stacked histogram. So rather than just looking at one resource, we can look at more than one at a time. Okay, so you can see kind of generally what your requirements are. So in this case, I'm looking at my engineering, and I can see it's a little erratic, like it's not nice and smooth. So maybe I can move this around a little bit and try and, get a bit more work here in the middle of June. But this gives another way of looking at the resource requirements. Okay. Now, the third thing we want to look at is we want to get an understanding of our costs. So I'm going to jump into costs. So costs come with a few different flavors in P6. So we already looked at labor, non-labor, which is usually equipment, and materials. Okay, so each one of those were in the resource section, as I showed you a minute ago. We also have the ability to put expenses inside of P6. So I'll show you one with some expenses. And I think one of these has some expenses. Let me just, there we go. Here's one with expenses. So expenses is just another way to add additional costing inside of P6, because not everything always falls nicely into our resource. So in this case, in this example, we have some mining, shipping, and we have a fixed rate usually for that. Okay, so in this case, we're shipping 8 units, and we've got a total of 82,000 per unit, and we've got the budget there that's being calculated from those two. Now, if the units went up or down, I'll just edit that so you can see how easy it is to work with this. So I bump that up, it makes the unit rate calculation, and off you go. Okay, so we've just revised the expense budget on there. And as we would update, we would start an activity, and then we could start putting the actual values in there. Okay, now that could come from your accounting system like an SAP. You could do it manually. You could load it up with Excel, and we've got a fantastic tool for loading data, mass data with our P6 loader tool. So updating can come in many different flavors. We've got a software tool that you could use called CAPS. Oracle has another updating tool called Team Members. So there's lots of different ways to get your updates in. Particularly if you're interested in doing resources and costs, often you've got that data in another system. So that's where either a formal integration could be interesting to save you a lot of time, or something that's sort of like an integration, but you might use a middleware like a P6 loader tool or Excel to do the loading. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to get data in to the system. Okay, so if you are interested in expanding that, but you're worried about how much time it's going to take to do the updates, those are things that are worth exploring. Okay, so once we've got those different costs that we're looking at, we can have lots of wonderful roll-up data. So we've got our original baseline, that's our total cost, 90 million. Our budget is a little bit more, 90,500,000, so we're up a bit. Okay, so there's a variance, so that's a bad variance, we're over, so that would show as a negative variance. We can see where we're at with our actuals to date. We can see where we're at with how much is left, so we're forecasting to have more left. Okay, so we're looking like we're going to even go up more above our last budget. Okay, so we're forecasting to go over. Now, again, that's hugely important for us to be able to forecast as we do the updates, because we need to react to that. Okay, if we're going over on costs, maybe we need to be looking at a change order with the client, perhaps. Or we need to be maybe looking at ways to cut costs on work that's coming up. Okay, so P6 lets you do that. And it's amalgamating all the data from the labor, from the non-labor, from the materials, and from the expenses. Okay, so that's where this could feel a bit overwhelming. We have a lot of fields, but they're very well organized. So it's very nice in terms of how you can uh, get the data organized in such a way that it's easy to see and work with. Okay, so P6 does a very, very good job on that. And of course, for all of those, we can have various graphics, various different ways of graphing that data. So we can have a summary. So this is costs now. The last one was units. So this is a cost graph. And if we want a bit more detail, we can have cost graphs with each one of those labor, materials, etc. broken out. Okay. So you can have a lot of nice different components for your reporting. So those are the main areas that I wanted to show you. We, of course, can do updating. So you want to do different updating. And some of you might have noticed some of these bars are blue. So these ones are in progress. So they've started. These activities haven't started as of yet. And if you see one that's fully blue, it's been completed. Okay, so those are sort of the three different statuses. So in terms of updating, we can start an activity as you see here. I can finish an activity, and that will set it to 100% complete. It will assume that I've used up all my resources, but if I didn't, perhaps I only used 10 hours here, I can put that in. And then it will use that to do any earned value and cost forecasting. Okay, so updating is relatively easy. Again, as I mentioned, if you've got this data in other systems, you can certainly do integrations into P6 as well. And ultimately, what we're trying to understand is how are we doing on these. Okay, so I won't do a deep dive on earned value today, but it does, P6 will keep track of your earned value. So some of you may be familiar with things like cost performance and schedule performance. So how am I doing cost-wise? How am I doing date-wise? Okay, so in this activity, you can see I've gone longer. My cost is over. So generally a number of one or less is good. A number of one or more is not so good. So P6 will keep track of that so that you have that earned value information, and you'll have the earned value graphics that you can produce. This is for the whole project. Okay, so this is looking at each task. This is looking at the whole project. Those are all things within the tool itself. So that was a very quick overview of P6 for the client. So all that means is the software is physically installed on your laptop or on your desktop, and you're accessing the database centrally, whether it's in your servers or out in the cloud. We also have a web version. So in this case, there's no software on your machine. It's purely a web-based application. Mostly all the same functioning, not quite the same. And of course, it's a little different look and feel. And as I mentioned, I'll do some webinars on that in the new year, if you're interested in seeing that. Okay, but very much the same sort of data. It's using the same database. Okay, so you can access, some of your team could access the web, and some can access the client. Okay, so very much up to you. And both have more or less the same functionality. Not exactly the same, just by the nature of the tools. And then more and more, our clients are taking that data using the P6 API. It's a web service. It's a different license. It's a smaller, less expensive license. And they're sharing the data in portals like Power BI. Okay. So this is the same data I was showing you, just put together in a different way. That's something to keep in mind as well, is you can start to use this data and share it out through your standard dashboarding tool for your company. Okay, so this is a very simple one, and we've got lots of different ones that we've put together. So if you're interested in something like that, definitely attend our P6 Reporter webinars. And we've got those every month. There's at least one, just to give you more ideas on how your team can get the data out to your different responsible areas of responsibility very quickly. Okay, so this I can see very quickly how I'm doing on some of these tasks. Am I over on costs? How's my labor? How's my duration? And you can see where I'm not doing so great. Okay, so these can be very handy, because not everyone you're trying to communicate with will be a P6 user. Okay, so that's where you can take this data and use it out with your team, your extended team, whether it's your own internal management team, or it could even be to some vendors, if that makes sense. Okay, so very, very wonderful way of getting all the data in one place with P6, and then making sure you're sharing it out appropriately. Okay, so I've shown you the main things I wanted to. I know it's quite a bit. I don't see any questions right now. If you have any, throw them at me and I'll try and tackle them. And if you want to reach out after and have more conversations, that's okay too. We can do it that way as well. So Primavera is used in so many industries, so many countries. There's a huge user base, and ultimately oil and gas, electrical, major construction, manufacturing, engineering. We've got clients who work on satellites, work on nuclear plants. So we've had the huge benefit of working in many parts of the world and with many clients. So these are some quotes from Oracle's clients that I'm just showing you here, just to give you a feel for it. And we've worked, because we're situated in Alberta, and we've got a lot of oil and gas in this space. That's a space we've done a lot of work in, but we have many clients in the electrical utility space in the US and Canada, in Philippines. We've worked with major construction companies all around the world. I've worked in nuclear for many years, rail construction, railroad maintenance for many rail companies. So P6 is used very extensively, and I hope I've given you a flavor for why. The coding, the capabilities of the multi-layer, multi-user is one of the biggest reasons. And just the power of the database being Oracle is a big factor as well. All right. Okay, so I don't see any questions yet. So certainly go ahead, throw them in, and I can try and address them. We are coming up for time. So you can also reach out to myself and or Donna, and hopefully you saw something that would pique your interest or maybe get you to explore whether P6 is a good fit for your team. And if you're using P6, maybe you saw something that you haven't had a chance to try with resources and costs. So I think I mentioned earlier, I've been using P6 for over 30 years, and Emerald has been in business for 28 years. And as I mentioned, I worked in claims for 5 years, and I found that so frustrating that I couldn't help. So that's really when I started Emerald. We've had programmers on the team since the beginning, And that's why we've got a lot of add-on tools. And you'll see that on our website and certainly on our webinar list. And we've got a lot of strength with our clients around the world in many industries. So certainly reach out. You've got Donna's information there. Okay, there are a few questions that came in. Okay, will this recording be available? Yes, it will be available. And so you should get a link to the recording after the webinar. It might take a day or two, but yes, we will share it. Okay, and then there's another question. What is the purpose of Slack in a schedule? Okay, so Slack, I think, is a Microsoft project term, and forgive me if I'm not bang on because I don't use that software very much. That equates to float in P6. And float is letting you know that if I have activities that have a sequence on it, that some of them could move. So if I have 5 days of float, it means an activity could move 5 days without bumping the whole project back. So float is the equivalent, and that's letting you know how much room that activity can move around without delaying the whole project. Now, the critical path I showed you are the activities that have no slack, no float. So those are the ones you've got to make sure you're keeping an eye on and making sure they don't get delayed, because they will bump your project and make your project late. Okay. So slightly different terminology, but the same idea there. Okay, so I think I'll stop the recording here.